Hi, everybody. It's Sasha, the school psychologist, and I am presenting study skills, research-backed skills to help get you ready for exams. I'm very grateful to be presenting on Ghana land. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Let's get straight into it because I know you don't have a lot of time if you are studying for your exams. So I'm presenting to you today some tips on managing your time and scheduling, some study and memory tips with research behind them. And then if you're also struggling with procrastination and managing the anxiety of exams, please stick around for those. But if you don't have too much time on your hands, head off after the study and memory tips and get back to your studies. That's what I'm presenting on this morning. Okay, so as a psychologist, it is my job to provide you with evidence-based information. And one study that I based a lot of this presentation on today, fancy science paper, is this paper from 2013. So a little while ago, but that looked at 10 common study practices and how effective they are for your learning, but also how easy they were to implement if they took a lot of resources or a lot of time, and if they're applicable to different schools and education settings. So that's where a lot of this information comes from. Just a little note too, well done on taking some time out of your busy study schedule to learn about effective study skills. I know it's hard to take a break when you are doing all of that exam prep, but I'm hoping it will be a valuable use of time. And please don't forget, you are an amazing and talented student, and all of us here at OIC are so proud of what you are doing. All right, some notes on managing your time because managing your study time is actually really, really important. So here's a few things that you can do to best manage your time. The first one in your study schedule is keeping variety. So not only is variety in your study schedule good for keeping you interested and motivated, but it also has a strong impact on our grades, trying to ensure that you're changing subjects and topics throughout your study day. So there was actually some research into whether having a big block of studying the same thing was as effective or less effective than breaking up study into different days. And the study I'm remembering, they looked at whether 4 hours one way, one day, and then studying it again a month later for 4 hours was as effective or less effective than studying for a straight 8 hours and then being tested on it later. And they found that it was something like 250% more effective to have that that breakup of your study time, 4 hours and 4 hours. Now, 4 hours is still quite a long time, but we're also talking about changing up the things that you're studying within a topic. So you could study, one part and then another part, or you could change up your subjects by studying one part and then another part and then swapping back and then swapping back. But keeping variety in your study schedule, in your study day, within the thing that you are studying is going to have a big impact on how well you do and going to keep you interested. So if you're setting out a strict study schedule where you're writing down what you're going to do every day, try and make sure that that has as much variety as possible. I know that we can feel really motivated by deadlines and the exam that's coming up the first or the one that we're most stressed about, but if you can vary it, there is evidence that you will do better. Number two, consistency. Our brains love routines, and I talk about this a lot in a lot of my sleep workshops. But having a really like kind of dedicated routine that your brain goes, it's time to study, it's time to stop study, it's time to relax, is really, really helpful. And we can do that by starting and ending our study days at the same time, so that you can get into that flow state. You can trick your brain into getting ready. If you can also have a really consistent study space, preferably outside of your bedroom if you can. If that's not possible, definitely not in your bed, separate from your bed in your bedroom can be really helpful so that your brain knows, okay, when I sit down at my desk, I study or I get into that study routine. Number three, regular breaks. Now, this is almost as important as your study that you're doing. Your body and your mind need rest. Large blocks of study, as we said, are not as helpful as shorter blocks. Giving yourself rewards is really important. And I'm not just saying this, regular breaks are really important. This is backed by a lot of research. And the research I'm thinking about in particular is called the Yerkes Dodson model of performance. So this is optimal performance. So if you have a look at our graph here, obviously, if we are not very aroused, and when I use the term aroused, that means anxious, your body getting ready to perform, that kind of hype, that jitter that you get. If we think about sports performance, that's really easy. But in terms of sitting down and studying, arousal or anxiety is important too. Because in the yellow zone, if we're sleepy, if we're unmotivated, if we're tired, our performance isn't going to be very high. But as that decreases, as that arousal starts to increase, you can see that our performance goes up. And there is that optimal level of arousal there in the green, our optimal anxiety zone, where we're just anxious enough to be motivated, but we are not so anxious that we fall into the red zone. So as you can see there, your performance starts to go down the more anxious you get there. The more stress you have, the more anxious you have, the more anxious you are going to do less well. So it's called the inverted U, right? We need the right amount of anxiety, the right amount of arousal to get us in that optimal zone, in the green zone. So a healthy amount is healthy, too much or too little, not so healthy. And taking regular breaks really fits into this. Because if we are really going hard, we're not getting enough sleep, we're not seeing our friends, we're not connecting with our family, we're not doing the things that rejuvenate us, we're probably going to fall into the red zone. And then quite the opposite of that too. If we are not doing enough study, if we're not anxious enough that we're going to do well, then we're probably going to fall into the yellow zone. We're not going to be motivated enough to get into study. A cautionary tale. I hope you can see the resemblance there. That's me with a crying face on. So when I was in year 12, it was really important to me to get a high enough ATAR to get into psychology. It was still my dream back then to be a psychologist, and the ATAR was really high. And I was studying my butt off in the holidays, in the study periods. I was really, really going hard. And in particular, I knew I wasn't that great at English. So I was doing lots and lots of practice exams and tests to try and do better at English. And English was my first exam. Now, I am a good example of what happens when you push yourself into the red zone. You study too hard, you don't take enough breaks, and you don't get your anxiety into that green area. I sat down in my exam and I was so stressed and anxious I didn't read it properly. And I ended up doing, there was 3 sections to my exam. I did 1 section in one, 2 sections in the middle, and ran out of space for the third one. So I failed my year 12 English exam. And I had a panic attack in the exam when I realized this in front of all of my classmates, and I had to be taken to the school counselors and taken home after that. I knew that I'd failed my English exam that I'd worked so, so hard for. Now, this is a cautionary tale for a few reasons. Obviously, we don't want you getting into that space where you're so anxious, like me, you make some difficult mistakes and you don't do as well as you want to. But also, spoiler alert, I am a psychologist now at Open Access. So even though my worst case scenario came true, I failed my exam, I was still able to follow my dreams and become a psychologist. So a cautionary tale on my part, please take time to rest. Please take time to do the things that rejuvenate you so that you can be in that optimal green performance. Okay, here's what you've come for, isn't it? Some study tips. I've got a section of do's and don'ts based on the research. Let's go with the don'ts first, or do less is how we should be referring to them. So do less rereading. I know a lot of us think that if I just read over my notes, it will sink into my brain. And the research has found that that's actually not true. The research has shown that passive repetitive reading, so that's not acting on the information that you're reading, produces little or no benefit for learning. It also takes a shorter amount of time for you to read and go over your notes, which can make it feel more effective because you're getting through more quickly, but you're actually not taking it on. We only take on a small amount of what we read or we can't apply it to those higher order questions. So that means those questions that ask you, tell me why, or give me an example, kind of rather than verbatim repeat what you've read, explain to me why this happens. And I know a lot of your exam questions are like that. So rereading, not as helpful as we might think. Number 2, highlighting. And I know a lot of us like to get our beautiful colors out and highlight the things in our work and think that we're going to remember it based on color coding. Not so true. In most situations, highlighting does little to boost performance. It can actually hurt performance on a higher level task that require inference making. Again, that is those times where you need to explain your answer or draw connections between two concepts to just demonstrate to your teachers that you get it. Highlighting can be effective if you need to find meaning in something that's really long or you need to summarize it, but it shouldn't be used by itself. It's not the most effective technique for studying for your exams. Number 3, cramming. And I hope your teachers have already conveyed this to you. But to be well learned, study material needs to be reviewed regularly and over time to increase understanding of its content and to really fuse it into your memory. We call this distributed practice. Again, this is what I'm talking about with learning something, having time to absorb it, and then relearning it again later. And it had some of the strongest evidence for students in this study. Our brains also need time to process information and store it into our long-term memory so we can draw on that in our exams. And often sleep is a really good time where our memories are consolidated. Our brain is working really hard. So we do need sleep. And obviously, the more times that you're learning something, you're sleeping on it, you're more likely to remember it. Now, if you're a person who's left things a little bit to the last minute, please don't stress. It's never too late to start varying your study day like we talked about, breaking it up so that you can cover multiple subjects or topics in your day, having a schedule that you tick off every day. It's not too late. The sooner you get started on your exams preparation, the less cramming you're going to be doing. Okay, what should I do? What are the do's? The biggest evidence that we have for remembering content and actually performing well in exams is practice testing. So practice testing at the end of each study session can improve performance by 10 to 30%, which is pretty amazing. Now, when I'm talking about practice testing, I mean all the variety of different ways where you learn something and then under a small amount of pressure, you are practicing that knowledge. You are trying to pull it out of your brain without having your book there, without having your notes there. And there's actually some interesting research into this in that it's a little bit connected with being embarrassed and that kind of overcompensation that we do. If you are asked to draw on your knowledge and you get something wrong and you learn what the answer is, you're more likely to remember it so that you don't get embarrassed in the future. So you can use that to your advantage. It's also important to really actively work on study content so that we can encode this into our memory. And even this works even with new content and this testing method, practice testing. So learning something and then being tested on it fairly quickly, even if you feel like you're not quite ready to be tested on it. That was 4 times more effective than just rereading it. So it's never too late to start. Now, imagine the number of your teachers have told you about where you can get old exams, or they might have given you some practice questions. They are really, really helpful ways of practicing before an exam. There's also a few other fun study tips around practice testing that you can do. The most obvious one, making flashcards. Here is a website where you can make flashcards, and I think you rate how difficult or easy you think the question is. You can also make your own physical flashcards. This is one that I used to really like doing when I was in uni, was turning my study into a game. So if you're using your flashcards, if you're maybe meeting up with someone from your classes, you can make a game out of it. It can be a trivia game. Maybe you see who can get the most questions right. And a bit like we mentioned before, if you get it wrong, just make sure that your partner or whoever's helping you test gives you the correct answer so that you can remember it for next time. Closed book. So this is a bit similar to what we spoke about before in terms of testing yourself straight away. So after you've learned a topic, can you close your textbook? Can you cover your notes and try and remember everything that you can about what you've just learned? You could also try explaining those concepts to someone who doesn't know about it, like a sibling or a parent or a friend. You could even just record it out on your phone, pretending that you are telling somebody as well. Write your own questions. So, who said that study has to be in order? Question, answer. What if you start with having the answers and then you have to write a question based on that answer, or you have to make, 3 different questions based on that answer. And this is a really good way of making sure that you truly understand the concept, because if you know the answer, how can you connect it back to the question? And then the last one's just a bit of a fun one. So drawing it out, could you use a cartoon or draw a picture to try and explain one of your study concepts? And if you're studying with someone, maybe you could play Pictionary, where you have a flashcard that tells you, I can't think of any chemistry contents or some kind of element, and you've got to, draw it out in a picture without using words, and your friend has to guess what that is. Any variety of that. It's just a different way to get your brain working and acting on your content. Another recommendation is chunking. So that means tying 2 or more concepts together, or breaking down a really big concept into smaller, more manageable chunks. Chunking. We know that a lot of your study content can feel really overwhelming. And even just that ability of, kind of sectioning it out and putting it into different chunks is a way of thinking about your content in a different way. You're drawing inferences between what's similar and what's different between those contents. So are you able to set up a daily schedule for when you'll be studying, breaking that down into more achievable chunks? Maybe starting with concepts you find easier. Maybe you could pair that with things that you find a bit more difficult, so that that study period is a bit more varied for you. Also, is there a funny story or an acronym that might help you remember different portions of work? I was trying to think of an example for this. And I remember for my Year 12 content, I'd make these bizarre sentences to help remember all of the elements of things that I'd need to remember. I can't remember any of them now, so they weren't very effective, but it's definitely something that helped me remember, when I needed to have 7 or 10 different keywords that I couldn't forget. And there's some acronym generators online if you're really struggling to make up funny sentences or funny words. Okay, like I mentioned, those are the study tips. If you're doing really well with your study schedule, you want to head off, well done. If you're still finding that you're struggling with procrastination and anxiety, stick around. I'll cover those now. So procrastination is really just putting off what you need to get done. And so I can imagine when it comes to your exams, putting off studying your content or doing the really hard stuff, doing some of the easier content, very, very normal. But there's a few things that we can do to try and overcome procrastination. Just a few tips to get you started. If you want to know more about procrastination, I've done a quite longer video that's on our YouTube that you can check out. But here's a few techniques to get you started. First one is just 5 minutes. What if I told you you only have to study for 5 minutes? I feel like you'd be much more likely to start that task than if you had committed to 2, 3 hours, or, in your SWOT vac, it could be 2 weeks. That's really overwhelming, and you're more likely to procrastinate. So if I told you you just have to study for 5 minutes, and at the end of the 5 minutes, you can decide if you want to keep going or if you want to stop. And if you do stop, you've still done 5 more minutes than you would have before. But often we find that once you've done 5 minutes, you've overcome that starting difficulty, and you can use that momentum to keep going for a little bit longer. Number 2, post-it notes. This is one of my favorites. So I know once I sit down to do something, my mind is wandering all over the place. Don't forget you've got to buy a birthday present for your sister. Oh, don't forget you've got to clean the car. Oh, did you remember to pay that bill? All of these thoughts interrupt me when I need to sit down and get something done. So what you can do is have some post-it notes next to you that you can catch those thoughts and write them down, stick them on the desk, and you can come back to those when your study period or when it's time for a break is over. A few more, visualizing your sessions. And this also applies in the anxiety section too. Athletes use this technique to visualize their success. There's no reason why you can't do this with your studies. Can you sit down and visualize what you need to do in this session? Visualize any obstacles and how you'd overcome them. Visualizing things that you might enjoy. Visualizing how you're going to feel when you're done. So break in the rewards that you've set. Even just that process of picturing it can help you overcome all those procrastination barriers. Number 4, tell someone. Making a commitment to somebody else can hold you accountable. So that might be a parent, that might be a teacher, that might be a sibling saying, yeah, I'm going to work on this today, is a bit of a verbal contract and can help you get going. Number 5, visual prompts. If you have set up your study desk somewhere, do you have anything up above you reminding you why you're doing this, why you're sitting down and dedicating so many hours of your holidays, of your study time to these exams? I have a picture of a frog from a previous technique about eating the frog, doing the most difficult, biggest task first. And that reminds me to snap out of procrastination and get in and do the most difficult task first. You might like to write yourself a motivating quote that reminds you that you're capable or reminds you what you are working towards. Maybe you have a vision board of the career that you're trying to get into, just anything above you that reminds you to get into it, what you're working towards. Okay, a quick thing on managing anxiety. Now, I hope I made my point before that anxiety is helpful. Not only is it extremely normal, it's almost also helpful when it comes to studying for exams and when it comes to doing your exams. Also, share with you my favorite quote: anxiety is your body's way of telling you this is important to me. You wouldn't be feeling anxious or worried about this if you didn't care, if you didn't really want to work towards a particular career or really want to prove to yourself or your family that you can do things or really love the subjects that you do or really care about your teachers. Anxiety is telling you this is important, and that can be really motivating. A few things to get us back into the green zone if we're finding that we're falling into that red zone, that arousal that is unhelpful, detracting from our performance. Take some calm, deep breaths. Now, I know that sounds really obvious, and I'm not going to throw you out all of the different techniques for deep breathing. I'm sure you've been told 100 of them. But this really does, at a physiological level, bring our arousal down, lower our body and all of those symptoms going on. Deep breathing reduces all of that. Um, I've got one example on the next page of a YouTube that I really like to use, but any deep breathing technique, whether that is just reminding yourself to deep breathe or counting or watching something that helps you calm down, is going to be helpful. Number 2, remind yourself you are strong, clever, and capable. There's a number of strengths that's got you to this point, whether that's year 11 or year 12. You are capable enough to be doing this subject. And not only reminding yourself that you're capable, but maybe just reminding yourself of the bigger picture. What's this that I'm working towards? How does my family feel about me doing this? Do they support me? Do I support myself? What will my friends say? Just strong, powerful statements to help remind you that you're capable. Number 3, get a good night's sleep before your exam, even if that means leaving some study unfinished. It's more important to get a good night's sleep before your exam than to finish off the things that you haven't done. I know it can be hard to leave that and, go and eat well and maybe spend time with your family relaxing before you go to bed, but it is really, really important. Number 4, don't panic if you don't get a good night's sleep. Sometimes that can be almost the most unhelpful thing, right? I need to get sleep. I need to be fresh for the morning. I'm not going to do as well as I want to. Any sleep is helpful. So if you're struggling to sleep before the night before your exam, that's normal. That's okay. Just rest, lie there, and try and let go of any thoughts related to worry or exam content. There's some techniques around letting those thoughts go around leaves on a stream. I've got one on the next page about sushi. Number 5, challenge any unhelpful thoughts that come up. Is there evidence against your thoughts or a more balanced way of thinking? If you're starting to get into those patterns of, I'm not going to do very well, I'm unprepared, often we focus on all the evidence that supports that. Can you take a step back and think about the evidence against that thought? Well, I did study for this. Well, I did actually do quite well on that test. My teacher did tell me that I was doing quite well. Could you also speak to a parent or a friend who might give you a more balanced perspective? Anything that helps you challenge those thoughts that come up on the day or the days before. Number 6, have an exam morning routine. Can you eat a healthy breakfast? Do you go for a walk? Do you sit down with your parents and have a chat or your siblings? Don't focus too much on cramming or trying to remember any of the content. On the day of an exam, it's really just getting you there, reducing your anxiety is going to be the most helpful thing. Now, my next page, I've just taken some screenshots of a few YouTube videos that I love. The first one there is a bit too long to play today, but it's 7 tips to beat exam anxiety by some of my favorite YouTubers, ASAP Science. They're amazing if you want to check out any of their content. But that's also a nice video about helping you out if you are starting to feel a bit anxious in an exam. Triangle breathing there. If you just YouTube triangle breathing, it's just 1 minute of something visual to help you slow down your breathing. I often find I forget the numbers, I forget how I'm meant to do slow breathing, but if I can put this on, I can see when I'm meant to be breathing in and out, and it just goes for 1 minute. The other suggestion there, this is one way that you can try and let go of any thoughts that are particularly unhelpful, or also if you're finding it difficult to sleep the night before an exam. This is the sushi train metaphor, and it talks about, if you were sitting in front of a sushi train, there would be delicacies, there would be disgusting things, and then there would be neutral foods that came past, and just being able to put them on the sushi train and watch them float away can be a helpful way to get to sleep, or can be a helpful way of helping you study. You might have your own techniques for managing anxiety. These are just a couple. Anything that helps you get into that green zone is absolutely amazing. And I'd love to hear from you if you have any more tips for me. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Good luck. Again, I can't stress how proud of you we are here at OAC for doing your best. And I know that you're going to do absolutely the best that you can. And I hope that maybe my story can be some evidence that even if you don't do as well as you thought you were going to, even sometimes if your worst fears come true, things can turn out all right in the end, and I wouldn't change a thing. So good luck, everybody. We're so proud of you.